Hollywood once glittered like a dream. But Ron Howard remembers the silence behind the shine. He remembers the smiles that hid monsters, the applause that protected them, and the secrets buried beneath fame. "You wouldn't believe what they did when the cameras stopped," he whispered. Behind every legend was a shadow, darker, colder, and far more real. And now, after decades of denial, he's ready to say their names. Errol Flynn, the devil behind the smile. Before James Bond ever ordered a martini or Jack Sparrow swaggered across a deck, Hollywood had Errol Flynn, the original rogue, the man who made danger look seductive and sin look glamorous. On screen, he was everything America adored, fearless, charming, impossibly alive. But off-screen, Ron Howard says, he was something far darker. "A predator protected by applause," he once whispered. Flynn arrived in Hollywood like a storm. Young, magnetic, and already certain the world owed him pleasure. Captain Blood turned him into a legend overnight, and the studios polished him into the perfect hero. But beneath that polished image was a man addicted to excess, alcohol, cocaine, chaos, and the thrill of dominance over the vulnerable. In 1942, the illusion finally cracked. Two teenage girls stepped forward, trembling yet defiant, accusing Flynn of statutory rape. America was forced to confront a truth it wished to ignore. Headlines blazed his name. Fans camped outside the courthouse. And Flynn? He laughed through testimony, smirking as though the law was just another stage, and he its leading man. And perhaps it was. Warner Brothers hired elite lawyers. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence blurred. The Hollywood machine spun like a shield around him. When the verdict declared him innocent, applause erupted. But something irrevocable had shifted. The hero's shine had rotted. Decades later, private letters resurfaced. Flynn bragging about his conquests, mocking the girls who feared him. Ron Howard admitted that reading them changed him. "That's when I understood Hollywood doesn't merely hide monsters. It manufactures them." Flynn's life burned the way he lived it, recklessly. Addiction hollowed him out until his body collapsed in 1959 at only 50. The coroner listed heart failure and cirrhosis, but Howard believed the real cause was simpler: a lifetime spent taking, never giving. Today, Errol Flynn stands not as an icon of adventure, but as a symbol of the darkness beneath Hollywood's golden veneer. A reminder that the brightest smiles can hide the hungriest shadows, and that sometimes the hero is the most dangerous man in the room.
Only wants and loves.
Kirk Douglas, the man who wouldn't stop fighting. Long before Hollywood crowned him a hero, Kirk Douglas was already a symbol of raw ambition, an immigrant son who clawed his way out of poverty and refused to ever be small again. On screen, he radiated justice, honor, and defiance. But off-screen, Ron Howard says, there was something far more explosive simmering beneath the surface. A rage beneath the smile, one that eats a person alive, he once reflected. Douglas rose like a force of nature. Spartacus didn't just make him famous, it made him untouchable. Directors admired him. Audiences worshipped him. But those who worked beside him whispered a different story. A man who demanded control of every room, who pushed people until they broke, who treated fear like a tool. Crew members spoke of sudden eruptions, shouted orders, slammed fists, tension thick enough to choke a set. Actress Deborah Paget once said, he didn't just dominate a scene, he dominated everyone inside it. And for many, that domination came with a price. Howard, who studied Douglas's performances as a young filmmaker, later admitted he sensed something unsettling behind the man's intensity. He didn't act like he deserved power. He acted like he owned it, he said. Rumors about Douglas's behavior toward women followed him across decades. Whispers, memoirs, accusations retold long after the events they described. The most haunting came from claims surrounding a young Natalie Wood, allegations repeated years later by her sister and biographers. Douglas was never charged, and Hollywood, in that era, often buried stories that challenged its legends. But the whispers never fully faded. They became part of the shadow trailing behind his brilliance. Even directors struggled to contain him. Stanley Kubrick once called Douglas the most driven man I've ever met, and the hardest to control. On set, he was fire, mesmerizing, dangerous, impossible to ignore. A storm disguised as a movie star. Yet the public never saw the storm. They only saw the triumphs, the awards, the speeches, the unbreakable hero. When Douglas accepted his honorary Oscar in 1996, the audience rose in applause. But Ron Howard saw something else entirely. A man who had spent a lifetime outrunning his own darkness, finally forced to stand still under the lights. Douglas lived to 103, long enough to see the world reevaluate the legends of Hollywood's golden age. Long enough for old silences to crack. Long enough for people to ask what power had cost and who had paid for it. To Howard, Douglas's life wasn't just a story of success. It was a warning, a reminder that behind some of Hollywood's greatest heroes were tempers that scorched, egos that consumed, and secrets the industry never wanted to face.
Talk. And she said, honey, yo.
Roman Polanski, The Exile of Shame. Before his name became a wound Hollywood could never fully cauterize, Roman Polanski was hailed as a prodigy, one of the rare directors whose trauma shaped his genius instead of shattering it. Critics called him visionary, studios called him indispensable. But Ron Howard says the truth he discovered later felt like betrayal. I admired his films before I understood the cost behind them, he admitted. Then I realized talent doesn't cleanse anything, it only hides it. Polanski's story had always been steeped in darkness. A survivor of Nazi occupation, a child who learned too young that the world could be cruel, he turned paranoia into poetry through films like Knife in the Water and Rosemary's Baby. Hollywood saw depth. Howard now believes they saw what they wanted to see. In 1977, the illusion shattered. Polanski was arrested and later pleaded guilty to unlawful sex with a minor, a case that shook the industry to its core. The victim was 13-year-old Samantha Gailey. The details were devastating, the evidence overwhelming. And then, before sentencing, Polanski fled the United States. His escape became one of Hollywood's most enduring moral scars. The industry split in two. Some defended him as a tortured artist. Others condemned the very idea that brilliance could be used as a shield. Howard never forgot the reaction. They spoke about art, he said years later, while a child's life had been changed forever. Yet Polanski continued directing in Europe, gathering awards, acclaim, and controversy in equal measure. The moment that haunted Howard most came in 2003, when The Pianist earned Polanski an Oscar. The crowd at the Dolby Theater rose in applause. Howard stayed seated. "I thought of that young girl," he said, "and I wondered what applause must sound like in her memory." As years passed, protests followed Polanski from festival to festival. In 2020, when he won France's César Award, attendees stormed out in outrage. For Howard, that moment symbolized something long overdue, a world finally refusing to separate genius from guilt. Today, Polanski remains in Europe, legally out of reach, but forever marked by the case he fled. To Howard, his legacy is the darkest chapter of the Golden Age, a system that could forgive almost anything, as long as the artist delivered brilliance on cue. "Hollywood will overlook anything," Howard once said bitterly, "as long as the lighting is good."
Have you imagined
Mickey Rooney, the smile that lied. Before his life unraveled in shadows and silence, Mickey Rooney was the face of joy, Hollywood's first great child superstar, the boy who seemed born from light itself. America adored him, MGM protected him, and every night, millions believed the same thing. No one with a smile that bright could possibly hide anything dark. But Ron Howard says the truth behind that grin was far more haunting. He made the world laugh while he was breaking apart inside. And sometimes he took others down with him, Howard reflected. Rooney rose with dizzying speed. Before he was 20, he was the highest-paid actor in America. Studio executives polished him into the perfect symbol of innocence, pushing him into a frantic whirlwind of work, publicity, and pressure no child could survive unscathed. Fame didn't shape Rooney, it warped him. Behind the stage lights was a man consumed by impulses he couldn't control. His marriages fractured one after another. He gambled away fortunes. Friends described him as unpredictable, charming one moment, cruel the next. Ava Gardner, one of his ex-wives, once joked bitterly that he was the shortest man with the biggest ego in the world, a line that stuck to him like a shadow. Colleagues whispered about mood swings and outbursts that left people shaken. Some who worked alongside him, including fellow MGM performers, described a volatility fueled by exhaustion, insecurity, and a desperate hunger for control in a world that treated him like a commodity. Judy Garland, his closest collaborator during their teen years, would later hint, quietly, carefully, that Rooney's presence added to the emotional burden she carried in those years. Not abuse, not villainy, just a pressure that came from someone who was also drowning. And then came the cruelest twist. In his old age, the man accused of hurting others found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own. In 2011, Rooney testified that he had been a victim of elder abuse, emotionally isolated, financially controlled, his accounts drained without his consent. The world that once applauded him now watched in shock as he described the fear he lived in behind closed doors. His final decades were marked by debt, lawsuits, and a career reduced to scattered appearances. The boy who once carried Hollywood on his shoulders died in 2014 with an estate worth less than a used car. His body initially went unclaimed until friends raised money for a modest burial. To Ron Howard, Rooney's life was the final puzzle piece, a reminder that the brightest smiles often hide the deepest wounds, and that in Hollywood, pain can be packaged as entertainment until the person beneath it disappears entirely. Maybe that was the saddest truth of all, Howard said. The smile wasn't just for the camera. It was the mask he needed to survive.
This ain't no traffic ticket, Logan.
Faye Dunaway, the queen of cruelty. Before scandals and whispers clung to her name, Faye Dunaway was Hollywood's cold, untouchable goddess, the kind of beauty that didn't need to ask for attention because the world fell silent the moment she entered a room. She was magnetic, icy, sculpted for the big screen. But Ron Howard says the truth behind that brilliance was far more brutal. She didn't need violence to hurt people. Her ego did the work for her, he once reflected. Dunaway's rise was meteoric. Bonnie and Clyde made her immortal. Chinatown made her terrifying, in the best way. She embodied grace sharpened into a blade. But behind the camera, a darker legend was forming. Crew members whispered about tantrums that shook sets, demands that pushed teams past exhaustion, and a temper that felt less like frustration and more like domination. On Mommy Dearest, the irony was impossible to ignore. Dunaway played a woman infamous for cruelty, and according to those who worked with her, she became her. Rumors of thrown objects, shouted orders, and emotional storms spread through the production like wildfire. Actress Rutanya Alda once said you could feel the fear on set, everyone waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. Directors struggled, assistants quit, makeup artists cried in silence. Frank Perry, the film's director, reportedly considered walking away entirely. Dunaway's obsession with control, every angle, every shadow, every eyelash, created an atmosphere Ron Howard later described as terror disguised as perfectionism. And the stories didn't stop. On other sets, she was accused of slapping crew members, humiliating assistants, even halting production until lighting made her look divine enough. She didn't just play divas, she embodied them, consumed them, became their final evolution. But Hollywood has a long memory, and even longer patience, until it doesn't. By the 2000s, the industry quietly turned its back. Calls stopped. Directors refused to work with her. One by one, the doors closed on a legend who once ruled every room she walked into. When she was fired from the Broadway revival of Tea at 5 in 2011, Dunaway blamed everyone but herself: fate, critics, production, anything that wasn't the Mirror. To Ron Howard, her downfall wasn't a cliff, but a slow, inevitable decline. She chased perfection so hard she forgot compassion, he said. Dunaway's story is more than a tragedy of talent. It's a portrait of what happens when brilliance becomes weaponized, when ego devours empathy, when power becomes poison. And in the end, the queen of cruelty found herself alone, still regal, still iconic, but ruling over nothing but the memories of a kingdom she burned herself.
Thing to stay at the Beverly Hills Hotel and
John Wayne, the tyrant of the West. To millions, John Wayne was America itself, broad-shouldered, fearless, unbreakable. He didn't just play heroes, he defined them. But Ron Howard says the man behind the myth was far more intimidating than any gunslinger on the big screen. When I learned who he really was, the hero vanished. All I saw was a bully wearing a flag-like armor, he once confessed. Wayne's rise was built on an image the studios crafted with military precision, the ultimate man's man, the symbol of rugged individualism. By the 1950s, he wasn't just a star. He was an ideology, a cultural fortress. And inside that fortress, according to co-workers, his temper ruled the set like unspoken law. Technicians recalled that when Wayne grew angry, the air froze. One actor said you either agreed with him or you were gone. Howard later described that energy as fear, pretending to be disciplined, the kind that smothers creativity long before a camera ever rolls. Wayne's public statements added fuel to his legend's darker edges. His 1971 Playboy interview, where he voiced controversial opinions on race, politics, and America's past, would later become one of the most debated documents of Hollywood's golden era. For some, it was honesty. For others, it was a glimpse into a worldview carved in stone, immune to empathy or change. On the set of The Searchers, tensions reportedly flared between Wayne and director John Ford over how his character, a violent, vengeful ex-Confederate, should be portrayed. Ford wanted complexity. Wayne pushed for something closer to defiance. In the final cut, the line between performance and personal belief felt disturbingly thin. Howard, who studied the film in school, said, "It's terrifying because you can't tell where the role ends and the man begins." Off-screen, colleagues described Wayne as a figure who demanded loyalty and punished dissent. Some recalled moments of belittling comments, sharp judgments, and a presence that swallowed entire rooms. He wasn't loud. He was inevitable. Even as illness overtook him in the 1970s, Wayne never softened his image. He dismissed critics as weak, condemned cultural shifts as betrayal, and clung to an America that existed more in myth than memory. When he died in 1979 at age 72, mourners honored the hero. But filmmakers like Ron Howard were left haunted by the chasm between the icon and the man. To Howard, Wayne became a cautionary tale. Power without reflection doesn't age into wisdom, it calcifies into bitterness. The legend survived. But the man behind it, he believed, never earned the myth carved on his statue. Hollywood called it the Golden Age. Ron Howard called it a wound that never healed. Because behind the light stood people whom power had turned into shadows. The scariest monsters aren't in horror films, Howard said. They're the ones living in the spotlight. And now only one question remains: which story haunts you most? The predator, the tyrant, or the smiling liar? Hollywood once sold the world a kingdom of light. But after the stories Ron Howard has finally pulled from the shadows, that light feels like glitter sprinkled over a graveyard. Shining, yes, but cold. The legends we worshipped were never heroes. They were masks crafted from fear, ego, and power left unchecked. Howard says he isn't rewriting history. He's just pulling the curtain down. and behind it lies everything Hollywood spent decades burying: the smiles that lied, the eyes that demanded obedience, the names protected by applause and silence. All of them, the charmer, the fighter, the fugitive, the broken boy, the queen of cruelty, the tyrant, shared one truth: power didn't elevate them. It darkened them, hollowed them, and eventually consumed them. Howard now looks back at Hollywood's so-called golden age, not with nostalgia, but with the sorrow of someone who finally understands what was sacrificed to build those legends. "Fame doesn't make you larger," he said. "It only makes the cracks easier to see. And when the last spotlight dies, only one thing is left standing: truth, stripped of glamour. So tell me, which story lingers in your mind long after the lights go out? The predator, the tyrant, or the smiling liar?"